Hey, Skip's pretty funny, isn't he? Skip called me a couple weeks ago and he said, hey, can you come speak at our Memorial Day event? And I said, I'd be happy to do it. He said, don't be late. And he called me this morning, don't be late. So Skip, we got here on time, didn't we?
Yes.
It's funny, we always prepare these speeches and all that, and I'll hit some of my points, but I just want to step back a little bit and just say thank you to Skip and all of you. Like Skip said, I grew up in Boston, did my time in the Marine Corps. I'm one of the state's public service commissioners now, and get around the state quite a bit, get to a lot of veterans clubs and a lot of organizations, but I'll tell you, I have never been anywhere in the state of North Dakota, or the country for that matter, that has done what you guys and Skip have done here. This is unbelievable. So I just, one more round of applause for Skip, because I've never seen. I was walking through and I saw the folks that I recognize that are still in the guard right now, saw some folks that I recognize that have been moved on, but I think it's all about, Memorial Day is about remembering those that have given their lives in actually defense of this country. And what better way than what you're doing right now with all of this? And I was urging Skip that we've got to figure out a way to capture this, because one of the challenges that we're facing now, Skip, 60-something, right? Skip and I were talking that, Skip was in Vietnam the year that I was born. I'm 46. And one of the things that now I'm retired from the Marine Corps, and the young guys and gals over there now are in their 20s, they were born in the 90s when I was in Desert Storm. And it's this generation that we're always going to need young men and women to step forward. But I think that when you capture like Skip has done, this is something that all the posts should be doing. And I think that once someone takes the lead on it, it's pretty easy for those to follow, because like Skip was saying just this last couple of days, that as he gets closer to the actual event, people say, well, you put this in the frame, you put this in the frame. So Skip, if you don't mind, I'd like to spread this idea around the state, because this is great. And like I said, I'm from Botany, and they're really trying now to get the Legion and the VFW Club kind of re-energized back there. And I don't think there could be any better way to energize a group than to get people invested, where they'll bring out the picture of their grandfather or their mother or their sister, and get involved in the clubs and get the veterans clubs and the leisure clubs going again. So anyway, with that, I'll just get rambling here too much, but I do remember that I grew up in Botany, like I said. I went to a lot of these Memorial Day type celebrations, and I really didn't quite understand what Memorial Day was all about as a young kid. You go to the celebration, I had a grandfather that was in World War II. My father was in Germany during the Berlin crisis, so I kind of knew about the military, and I kind of knew about sacrifice, so I thought. But today, I really realized that sacrifice is not only the young men and women that deploy, it's the families that are back home while they're gone, and it's also those families that, after the loved ones have lost their lives, that deal with this forever, like Skip was talking about his good buddy. I mean, I'm sure it seems like it was yesterday. And so there's the remembering of the folks, and it's also remembering those family members that are with that forever. And it never really became so apparent to me as when I was in Desert Storm, but I was in Iraq in the early phases of it. And as we were going through into the initial push into Iraq, a buddy of mine was killed. His name was Major Nabe. He's a good guy. Accidents happen, and he was killed. And we're doing our job as Marines. You take it all in stride. You do what you got to do, and you keep moving. But it wasn't until I got back home to the Marine base at Camp Pendleton that I really realized the sacrifice that the community faces. I'd never even thought about that his son was going to the same school as my daughter. So the effects that took place on his son and all the kids were dealing with it. His wife was going to the same places that my wife was going to, trying to have some type of normalcy while the spouse is deployed. So I think when you think about Memorial Day, we always want to remember those people that gave their lives in the defense of this country. But there's still a lot of spouses out there, and a lot of kids out there that are dealing with that loss too. So take time to think about them. And I see that Skip's put together the list of 24 North Dakotans that have given their lives in the current global war on terrorism. And Specialist Canning, I know his wife and his daughter, and they're still going through that. So I think Memorial Day, if you got a chance, talk to some of these folks, their family, because that's also very important. Because even after the war is over, the sacrifices there and the families deal with it. I did want to talk a little bit about what Memorial Day started and where it came from. It was originally called Decorations Day. It was a time set aside to honor our nation's Civil War dead by decorating the graves. It was first observed in May 30th of 1868 to commemorate the sacrifices of our Civil War dead. And during the celebration of the first Decoration Day, General Garfield made a speech at Arlington National Cemetery, after which 5,000 participants helped to decorate the graves of more than 20,000 Union and Confederate soldiers buried at that cemetery. By the late 1800s, the name had evolved to Memorial Day, and many communities across the country had begun to celebrate. Following World War II, observances began to be honoring those who died in all American wars. And in 1915, a lady named Mrs. Michael wrote the following poem that became very popular. We cherish too the poppy red that grows on fields where valor led. It seems to signal to the skies the blood of heroes never dies. She then conceived the idea of wearing poppies, and I see many of you have poppies out there in the audience to honor those died in our country's service and to help raise a little money too. She was the first to wear one and sold poppies to her friends and co-workers as a way to benefit those service members in need. Shortly before Memorial Day in 1922, the VFW became the first veterans organization to nationally sell poppies. And 2 years later, the Buddy program was selling poppies made by disabled veterans. And in 1948, the U.S. Postal Service honored a stamp with Mrs. Michael's likeness, and a 3-cent stamp, which actually really then became the big push to have Memorial Day and Buddy poppies. And in 1971, Congress declared Memorial Day a national holiday to be celebrated the last Monday in May. So it's important to note that on Veterans Day, we celebrate the service set aside for all veterans, living and dead, who served in our country. But Memorial Day is a day to celebrate those who specifically perished in our nation's battlefields. On Monday, we'll have many events around the country, similar to this one, where folks will attend and talk about the significance of Memorial Day. And there'll be a big ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery in which we'll place a small American flag in the tomb of the unknown soldier. And it's customary that the president or the vice president will be there to give the speech honoring those who perished at the tomb, and that speech will be at the tomb of the unknown soldier. You step back a little bit. Since America united as one nation, this great nation has surrendered its bravest to liberate the oppressed and ensure the freedoms of citizens and future generations. Battle lines were drawn throughout the world, and America defended freedoms at home and abroad. I'd like to briefly review the history of our major battles, the countries that we were engaged in, and a number of Americans who paid the highest price. I know that the first time I went through this, it's just really just a lot of Americans, if you think about it. In the American Revolution, from 1775 on, we had 4,435 Americans died in that war. The War of 1812, 2,260 Americans. The Mexican War, 13,283 Americans. The Civil War, 780,333 Americans, almost 1 million people. Spanish-American Wars, 6,652 Americans. World War I, 116,708 Americans. World War II, 407,316 Americans. The Korean War, 36,512. The Vietnam War, 58,193 Americans. Persian Gulf War I, 148 Americans. And our current global war on terrorism, over 6,000 Americans. So when you think about that, included in all those folks is recently, like I talked about, our 24 North Dakotans. And these were the young men and women that grew up in your communities. They attended local schools, they graduated from the local high schools. They were basically the kid next door. They were young men and women doing their job, and they were actually killed in the line of duty, defending our way of life. Sometimes we want to believe that wars only happen in history books, and that our freedoms will always be there. Neither of those statements is true. It'll always take young men and women of every generation to answer the call when freedom is attacked. Wars are real, and the names that appear in the history books are real people. Thomas Jefferson once said, "The price of freedom is eternal vigilance." Since our country declared its independence, over 1.4 million men and women have given their lives in the defense of this nation. If you think about that, that's over 6,000 Americans every year. So when you hear the statement, freedom isn't free, I mean, it couldn't be more true. I think at times we forget about the constant struggle to preserve freedoms. In every war, the U.S. hopes it's the last war, but realizes the struggle of good versus evil will never end. Today, we find ourselves in the middle of another global conflict. We have operating forces ashore, in the air, and afloat throughout the world, executing our current global war on terrorism. Young men and women doing their part to preserve the freedoms that was passed on to them, and to make sure it's passed on to that next generation. So on this day of remembrance, I would just ask you to sit back and think about what those Americans have done for us to give us the freedoms we have, and to keep doing like you folks have always done. Keep living your lives to the fullest, keep attending events like this, and keep helping us understand that freedom isn't free. I just wanted to close with just a comment for a phrase from President Reagan. He talked about freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. You don't pass it on to your children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed down to them to do the same. Or one day we'll spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children about what it was once like in the United States, where men were free. Just want to add something in this. That's usually the end of my speech. But the one thing that's going on right now in our country, I think, that's very unique, is where I talked about, we've got our World War I generation. The last World War I soldier passed away about a year ago. Our World War II veterans, I think Skip had a few of them stand up. They're leaving us every day. Our Korean and Vietnam veterans, they're getting older, they're getting more involved with veterans clubs. My generation of veterans. And you hear a lot about people say that I worry about this younger generation. I don't worry about them one bit, because I think I know they're going to do exactly what the previous generations have done. And let me tell you why, because I'm 46. I got a daughter who's 20. And when she was a very young girl, this thing called the September 11th happened. She saw her country be attacked. She saw her country go to war. And the kids of that generation, they understand what it's like to have your country attacked. They understand what it's like to have to go and defend it. And now there's a lot of things we're going to sort out, but I'll tell you what, that I have no concerns at all about this next generation, because they're doing the things they have to do, just like previous generations. And I'm very optimistic as we look forward. Just the fact that all of you are out here today really is exciting. And I'll just close with that. Thank you all very much for coming. Skip, thank you for the great work that you do, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
He's not worried about the younger generation. He hasn't seen my kids. As I said, I had two of them. One came out okay, and the other one's a lawyer. We're going to go over to the park, where, again, I have to thank my very good friend for his extreme dedication in the park and memorial and the display he has over there. We're going to go over there and say a prayer and taps and lower the flag to half-staff, and then we're going to come back over here and tell lies. So you're all welcome to come on over there with us, or if you want to stay warm in that seat, if it feels good, then that's what you can do too, because we live in a free country. Thanks to our guys.